Chapter 3, Verbal Communication. In this chapter, we will be looking at how you can use your words to help make more of an impact in the messages that you are sending. We've looked already at organization and the importance of making sure that your presentation is organized, it's well thought out, it's easy for the audience to follow. We've also looked at delivery and discussed the importance of how you use your words to make more of an impact. Not necessarily your words, but the way that you communicate that message, that you have a good vocal variety, you have a vocal fluency, you're easy for the audience to hear and understand, and that your words really your voice really adds an impact to the words you're saying. So now we're going to talk about how you can choose the correct words to ensure that your message is concrete, easy to understand, and leaves little room to interpretation. So to start off, we're going to talk about language and meaning. So as we know, language is symbolic. Every language is essentially a combination of symbols that someone has said, this represents this. A symbol is something that stands in for or represents something else. Codes are culturally agreed on and ever-changing systems of symbols that help us organize, understand, and generate meaning. Displacement refers to our ability to talk about events that are removed in space or time from a speaker or a situation. So as we continue, we're going to talk a little bit more about how we can use language in an effective way in our speeches. But I want to look just a moment at displacement. So think about that. The property of language is called displacement. And as I said, it refers to our ability to talk about events that are removed in space or time from a speaker or situation. So animals do communicate, but in a much simpler way that is only a reaction to stimulus. Further, animal communication is very limited and lacks the productive quality of language that we'll discuss further. So think about verbal communication. In the earliest human days, verbal communication was not very symbolic or abstract, as it likely mimicked sounds of animals in nature. Such a simple form of communication persisted for thousands of years. But as later humans turned into settled agriculture and populations grew, then the language became more distinguished. More terms, more symbols were needed to accommodate the increasing number of things like tools, ideas, everything that emerged from the agricultural system. There weren't written symbols during this time, but objects were often used to represent other objects. For example, a farmer might have kept a pebble in a box to represent each chicken he owned. As further advancements made keeping track of objects, representing objects more difficult, more abstract symbols and later written words were able to stand in for an idea or object. Despite the fact that these transitions occurred many thousands of years ago, we can trace some words that we still use today back to their more direct and much less abstract origins. So, for example, the word calculate comes from the Latin word calculus, which means pebble. But what does a pebble have to do with calculations? Pebbles were used very long ago to calculate things before we developed a verbal or written numbering system. So think about this, that sometimes our symbols or our codes may be removed from the time and space we're in now, but has kind of been adapted through decades and centuries. The triangle of meaning is a model of communication that indicates the relationship among a thought, symbol, and referent, and highlights the indirect relationship between the symbol and referent. So the triangle of meaning is basically, let's look at the relationship between the thought we have, the symbol, and the way we communicate that message. So denotation refers to definitions that are accepted by the language group as a whole, or the dictionary definition of a word. Connotation refers to definitions that are based on emotion or experience-based associations people have with a word. So when we want to ensure that we're communicating clearly, we need to ensure that we're using the dictionary definition of a word and not a word in a way that we have a different emotional attachment to it. I'll give you an example of that. Well, first of all, I do think all of us have there are words that we have an averse reaction to for one reason or another. It could be based on historical significance regarding the word. It could be based on a personal experience regarding the word. But there's some words that we may hear and we're like, I don't like that word. I don't like the way it sounds, or I have a bad experience with that word, or we don't like the word. So this has been many years ago, because it was not too terribly long after September 11th, 2001. A friend of mine and I were in New York, and we were in a cab, and the cab driver wasn't originally from the United States, and there was something going on at a school, and you could tell that they had evacuated the school as we were driving around somewhere in New York City. And at that point, the cab driver said, things are out of control here. There's constantly something going on. There's chaos going on. And he said, we need a regime change in this country. And my friend and I talked about that later after we got out of the cab, that we had, never heard the word regime used in connection with the United States government. And while when you look up the dictionary definition of the word, it probably was not an inaccurate use of the word, but we had a negative reaction to that word being used as our country's government. I had heard of regimes in other countries, dictatorships, countries that had a lot of more volatility than I perceived as us having here in the United States. And so that word regime changed meant something much more to me than it did to him, because in his mind, basically he meant we need a change in the next election. And so it was just kind of the connotation, the emotional attachment to a word. Language is learned. The rules of language. Grammar refers to the rules that govern how words are used to make phrases and sentences. Some linguists have viewed the rules of language as fairly rigid and limiting in terms of the possible meanings that we can derive from words and sentences created from within the system. Others say these rules are pretty open and flexible, so that a person can make choices to determine meaning. Still others have claimed that there is no real meaning and that possibilities for meaning are limitless. So think about that. So I think for most of us, we would respond more to the linguists that say there's a very structured system and we must abide within that system. Because if you deviate too far beyond that, then think about the difficulties when it comes to communicating. Because you're talking about even within your own language, not to mention the challenges that we have when we're communicating with others that do not speak our language or aren't originally English language speakers. So think about that, the fact that it's more flexible, it's open to interpretation, that it's a fluid language and the symbols are all a fluid thing. That's kind of overwhelming to think of the fact that it's not concrete, because we think of things being more easily communicated if it's concrete. Language acquisition refers to the process by which we learn to understand, produce, and use words to communicate within a given language group. We acquire language is affected by factors. It's not just about learning words. It's about learning words in a way within the rules of grammar for the language code that we are using that other people will be able to understand us. So it's not just about learning vocabulary. It's about learning the vocabulary within the set of grammar rules that abide within that language code. Language acquisition, 2 to 4 months, babies can respond to different tones of voice. 6 months, babies can associate words like bye-bye with the corresponding behavior and they begin babbling. 8 to 10 months, babies learn that pointing can attract or direct attention as they begin to follow adult conversations. They also may make more eye contact. Babies in 1 year recognize some individual words. They maybe remember people's names. They usually remember no and basic rituals of verbal interaction. Language acquisition after the age of 2 seems sluggish compared to what happens prior to that. Year 2 represents a time of intense practice of verbal trial and error. Ages 3 to 5, we continue to develop our pronunciation ability, which develops enough by our teens to allow us to engage in everyday conversation. So when you think about language and you think about language development, think about exposure. Think about children that are not exposed to a great deal of language on a day-to-day basis. it's a difficult thing to overcome later in life if you aren't exposed to language. So what does that mean? That means talking to babies, reading to babies, making them immersed in language on a day-to-day basis, and that helps develop that language. If in the 8 to 10 month and 1 year range, if you encounter a baby that's not engaging, that's not making eye contact, that's attention is not focused on the primary source of communication, that's when you begin to kind of have some concerns, because a baby's world revolves around those adults and those people around them. And so their eye contact should go to the speaker. Their attention should be drawn to the speaker. But if you see that that's not happening, that's when you kind of begin to have some concerns of some other things that may be going on. With 3 to 5, I know that in Texas, at least, students that are children that are age 3 can begin speech therapy within the school system. The earlier that you help a speech development problem, a language problem, the better. And for some students, it may be coming to school early and getting that language exposure that they may not have had. For others, it may just be simple articulation things. But do keep in mind, as far as articulation goes, there are some things that are age appropriate. For instance, learning your R's just takes a little bit longer for some students, and they may not master that till the end of first grade or second. So it kind of depends. But language acquisition is something that happens. And here's the thing. If it doesn't happen like it's supposed to, it's a difficult thing to overcome later in life. So it's very important, as much as possible, that babies are exposed to language. So functions of language. Language is expressive. Verbal communication helps us meet various needs through our ability to express ourselves. We express observation. We report on the sensory information we are taking or have taken in. And we are able to express thoughts. We draw conclusions about the experiences that we have. We can express our feelings. We communicate our feelings. That's part of social norms about how, when, where, and whom we express our emotions. We don't express all of our feelings to everyone at all times, or we shouldn't. And needs. We're able to express our needs to others in order to get things done. Language is powerful. Language expresses our identities. It affects our credibility. It's a means of control in some way. Control sometimes has negative connotations, but through language, we're able to maybe get people to do things that we need or want them to do. Language is performative, it's fun, and it's dynamic. Neologisms are newly coined or used words, so think of slang. It refers to new or adapted words that are specific to a group, context, or time period. It's less formal. You won't necessarily incorporate this into your presentations because slang, it doesn't cross over within all age groups, and it doesn't cross over within all cultures, and it doesn't cross over within all geographic regions. So slang is something that you should use sparingly in professional presentations or in presentations when you have a diverse audience. So functions of language: relationship. Language is relational. It brings us together, but language can also separate us. So unsupportive messages or global labels: you're a liar. Sarcasm is a form of unsupportive messages. Dragging up the past is a form of an unsupportive message. Negative comparisons, judgmental you messages, and we're really bad about this. You made me feel this way. You did this to me. And then threats are common types of unsupportive languages. So it's important to use your words clearly. The level of clarity with which we speak varies depending on who we talk to, the situation we're in, and our intentions and motivations. So there's a ladder of language abstraction. So the most concrete is direct experience with sensory information about thing that we will later call Bessie. And then you go up. Bessie, symbol assigned to thing, allows us to communicate about it even when it's not in present. And then we would go up to cow, a symbol that recognizes other bovine creatures. And then livestock, a symbol that recognizes animals kept on a farm. Asset, a symbol that represents something that's a monetary worth. And wealth, which is something that represents prosperity, fortune, and success. So if your wealth comes from your livestock, then it would go from wealth, asset, livestock, cow, Bessie, and then a direct experience regarding Bessie the cow. Creating the whole message. Whole messages include all the relevant types of expressions needed to most effectively communicate in a given situation. So that's what you see, what you think, what you feel, what you need. Partial messages are missing a relevant type of expression and can lead to misunderstanding and conflict. And contaminated message include mixed or misleading expressions. I don't know about you, but I do sometimes have a habit of making pretty bold statements, or just a statement in general. And I'll say, yeah, I don't like this person. I'm not going to vote for this person in the election. So that's a specific statement. But then someone that's really paying attention says, well, can you tell me the reason why? And sometimes our instinct is to be like, well, I don't know, I don't like them, or they give me a bad feeling, or there's just something about them. And so when we don't communicate a whole message, then we're leaving big blanks with the people that we're talking to, and they're gonna ask for reasons why. So if I say I'm not gonna vote for this person, and somebody says why, and all I have to say is I don't like them, that's not a whole message. That's not communicating a whole message. So we must use our words effectively. Effective language refers to language used to express a person's feelings and create similar feelings in another person. Figurative language is results of breaking semantic rules, but it's in a way that really helps enhance meaning and understanding. It's in a way that you can use your words to create vivid imagery like similes or metaphors. And then evocative language is vivid language that captures people's attention and their imagination by really evoking and conveying emotions and actions. So that's really those strong call to action. That's a very descriptive situation that really pulls the audience in to what's going on. We must use our words ethically. Words have power. And I think we've talked about this at the very beginning. You can't take them back. So everything we say has power, and it's out there. Once we've communicated a message, it's out there. So we have to be very careful about what we say and how we say it, because there's repercussions based on the power of the words we choose. So the way we talk, the words we choose to use, the actions we take after we are done speaking are all important aspects of communication ethics. Civility, our strong emotions, our own beliefs, attitudes, and values can sometimes lead to incivility in our verbal communications. So, and I think all of us can be challenged by this. If there's a topic that we are extremely passionate about, and you even match that when we're talking to someone that's equally passionate, maybe on the other side, sometimes to keep our emotions in check, sometimes to stay calm and poised, that's a challenging thing. So it's very important that even in the most challenging of circumstances, that we find a way to stay calm, to think before we speak, and to make sure that the words we're choosing are powerful. The following are common individual and situational influences that may lead to breaches of civility. So individual differences that definitely can lead to breaches in civility. Ignorance. I feel like all of us have talked to someone that made us feel like we're beating our head on the wall. We felt like no matter what we said, we can't get anything across to them. And that can be extremely challenging. Lack of skill. If we aren't very skilled in communication, civility and incivility is quickly nearby. A lapse of control and negative intent. So sometimes we have conversations with people and we're out to get them. I mean, we just go into a situation guns blazing. We have our message ready. Not too long ago, we were in a meeting at work, and it was something that we hadn't done before, and it was something that we called different people from each campus to come and talk about a specific program. And I remember putting in the email, this is just kind of a check-in where we're just going to get an idea and a gauge of how things are going. Well, we had a full day of meetings, and the very last one, the group from that campus walked in, and one lady was just, I mean, she came in ready to attack. And she had a lot to say. She was very abrasive in the way that she said it. You could tell that she had a chip on her shoulder and that she had an arsenal of words ready to go the second she walked in the room. Her answers did not even meet the questions. You could tell she had in her mind what she expected to be the topic of discussion, and she was ready to answer anything she thought would be a problem. And so, but that wasn't the intent of the conversation at all. I remember asking some of the people that had gone before and saying, "What did you tell her about our meeting?" And they're like, "It was nothing. We didn't talk about it." But the fact of the matter is, she had a preconceived notion that the communication interaction was going to be negative, and she came in a very unprofessional style in an effort to defend herself. And sometimes we do that. Sometimes we have our rebuttal in our head and we have that rehearsed and we're ready to attack. But we really need to sit back and see what's presented to us in the moment, and then figure out the very best way to eloquently and calmly address it. Polarizing language refers to language that presents people, ideas, or situations as opposites. It kind of exaggerates differences or overgeneralization. So we have swearing. I would tell you, don't swear in your presentations. I do see that this happens sometimes, especially if someone makes a mistake. And if incorporating swear words is common for them in their everyday lives, then that'll sneak in sometimes if something goes wrong in their presentation. But I would tell you to avoid swear words or anything that you think someone might perceive as being a swear word. We want to make sure to manage any stress or aggression we have and limit language like that. Accountability, inferences or conclusions based on thoughts or speculation, but not direct observations. Facts or conclusions based on direct observations or consensus. And judgments are our approval or disapproval that are subjective and not verifiable. Frequent sources of miscommunication is inference, observation, confusion, or the misperception of an inference as an observation. So sometimes we make invalid inferences, and that leads to miscommunication. So language, society, and culture, we arrive at meaning through conversational interaction, which follows many social norms and rules. One social norm that structures our communication is turn-taking, and we all know people that are better at this than others. There are times that I'm not very good at this if I'm anxious or excited or have a lot to say, but we do know that a norm of our communication is that you take turns, that you allow every party to contribute to the conversation. We all know people that interrupt. We all know people that do not let us finish what we're saying. Some conversational elements are highly scripted or ritualized, especially the beginning and the end of exchange and topic changes. Accents are distinct styles of pronunciation. We know that we have a lot of different dialects and accents in our country. Dialects are versions of language that have distinct words, grammar, and punctuation. Accent has been something that has worried me. Teaching you guys in Nebraska. Seeing that I live in Texas and we definitely have our own distinct accent. And you know that it's very, even within Texas, there are several different distinct accents where you can tell that someone's from East Texas versus Central Texas or West Texas. And Nebraska is probably the same way. It can be very distinctive. Social norms are culturally relative. What is considered a powerful language style varies from culture to culture. And gender also affects how we use language, but not to the extent that a lot of people think. Communication accommodation and code switching. Communication accommodation theory is a theory that explores why and how people modify their communication to fit situational, social, cultural, and relational context. Convergence, a person makes his or her communication more like another person's. Divergence, a person uses communication to emphasize the differences between his or her conversational partner and his or herself. And code switching refers to changes in accent, dialect, or language. And we do this a lot. I notice a lot my nephew, when he is away at Baylor for a period of time, and yes, that's still in Texas, but a lot of his friends are not Texans. And I noticed that when he comes home after being at school for a while, his Texas accent is not quite as strong. On the other hand, his friends' parents see the opposite. They see, of course, that once they're in Waco for a long period of time and come home, a Texas accent has integrated into their speech. But aside from that, I think we do this in other parts of our lives. I think we do this. I know that I do this in a meeting at work versus when I get on the phone with a parent. There is a conversational style that changes when I'm on the phone with a parent that has a concern, and you're wanting to sound empathic. You're wanting to sound caring. You're wanting them to know that you're someone that they can talk to and depend on. And so sometimes, while it's still a professional conversation, the accent kind of changes because you want that person to feel like you are like them, that you know where they're coming from. And so I feel like sometimes accents kind of can change. I know that women feel like there's a lot of code switching that happens in their communication style, from maybe being a mother and a wife in one setting versus a professional in a business setting. There may be code switching on what's said and how it is said. To me, this is something interesting to watch with yourself. Do you see yourself code switching in any way? When I'm with my sister and she answers the phone, I know if it's a member of our family or someone else because she sounds completely different. And I always say, why do you never sound that nice when I answer the phone? But it's a completely different voice. It's a completely different accent. I don't know who she becomes when that happens, but she becomes someone very different. But then I catch myself doing the same thing at work when I answer the phone and it's a parent versus maybe a coworker. So it's interesting to kind of see how we transform in our communication. Cultural bias is a skewed way of viewing or talking about a group that is typically negative, and we know that biases occur due to race, gender, age, sexual orientation, and ability. It's something that we have to be very careful of when we're giving presentations and we're talking in any audience, in any public setting whatsoever. We have to be aware of the cultural biases that sneak into our language. And I'm going to tell you that's something that's ever changing. That's something you have to constantly be aware of, is the language that we use and the bias that can come from that language. And I would say that is changing drastically as far as words that we never would have thought of as demonstrating a bias, but they do. And so that's something that it's important to be culturally aware, and it's important to use language that is not offensive in any setting, and to be very careful of the words that we choose. I want to remind you that our language